talk about their near-death experiences, maybe, during a heart attack or some other event, a drowning, near drowning, or whatever. They very often have the experience of leaving their body, being aware that their consciousness is functioning outside of their body, maybe moving through a tunnel, maybe toward a light. Sometimes there are family members, deceased family members, or religious figures. Sometimes there's a conversation about it, you need to go back, it's not your time, all of that. Well, my people actually do die, but their death came in a way that was unexpected and traumatic, and apparently they need some aftercare. They need something on the order of a healthcare continuum in the afterlife, just to calm down and get acclimated before they're really ready for the adventure of what we might think the afterlife would hold. Hey everybody, I'm Father Nathan Castle, and this is your Superior Self.
Father, thank you for taking the time. I really do appreciate this.
Well, honored to be invited.
Talk about your beginning, right? Like, so I'm always interested in how people get into priesthood, right? What was that like? And I'm still learning about the different avenues you can go down. Like, I think you're went into a different order. I can't remember that name is escaping me right now.
It doesn't escape me. It's Dominican. I'm a Dominican.
So talk about that, right? Like you thought in your book, Afterlife Interrupted, you talk about your path and how you got into the church. Very, very fascinated by that story. Like what sparked that interest for you?
Well, I was born into a Catholic home, and in addition to learning the rules and regulations of an organized religion, I feel like I got really good training in spiritual things, and even at a really early age, a solid cosmology of what is this place? Why am I here? Purpose, destiny. That was all being explained to us in Catholic school at like a first grade level. And of course, you have to make a decision about how you live your life, and are you going to stay this or do something else, and so on. So I had to mature in the faith and decide to stay with it. And some of it's like being a citizen or a member of your family. You might not love every last thing about it, but it's still yours and you still belong. And maybe you choose to just plant yourself and try to leave things better than you found it. Both of my dad's sisters were also members of this order. They were Dominican first grade teachers, and they both stayed into their 90s and upon their deaths. At one point, they had more than 150 years of vowed life between them. Wow. And my grandmother was a mystic who lived next door and walked around talking to the saints. And my mom taught me how to pray for the souls in purgatory, how to pray for people that had died, and I was very faithful to that. So later in college, I went to a Presbyterian college in San Antonio, Trinity University. And there I was in a prayer group I was the only Catholic for a long while. I was always having to explain to people, misconceptions that they had been taught, that we, pray to idols, or just different things. For some, I was the first Catholic that they'd ever known. And so I became this kind of like 20-year-old answer man, trying to do the best I could to field their questions. But over time, my parents taught me that I could be anything I set my mind to. There must be people in your audience who had a similar training. And I kind of started asking God, okay, what does the world need one more of that I could become? And I used to pray, oh God, take me, I'm yours. Just don't make me be a priest, I'm in. And after a while, I got sick hearing that and just said, oh, why not? If you want me to do that, I'll even include that. And one thing led to another. In our church, ordination is still open only to men and only to unmarried men. and I fit the bill, and I was educable, and it just, there's so many people who did not qualify under that structure. I just thought, oh, I'll do it. And then I had to start looking at how to do it, joining a diocese, joining an order, which order. And Dominicans, St. Dominic was known as the joyful friar. And when I learned that, that was the end of my search. I just thought, joy. I think I would like joy. I'd like that. I'd like to be a joyful friar.
Sure.
So I did that 42 years ago.
Wow. That's amazing. But you also have a night job.
I do. I think we're going to talk about that, aren't we?
Absolutely. Why don't you lead us into that? What is that night job?
It's helping people that died sudden, violent, traumatic deaths make a movement in the afterlife from one plane or level to the next. Um, I've learned over time, I've been doing this about 25 years, that for some people, are you familiar with the near-death experience?
Absolutely. Yes.
I'm a member of IANS, the International Association for Near-Death Studies, and when you hear people talk about their near-death experiences, maybe during a heart attack or some other event, a drowning, near drowning, or whatever, they very often have the experience of leaving their body, being aware that their consciousness is functioning outside of their body, maybe moving through a tunnel, maybe toward a light. Sometimes there are family members, deceased family members, or religious figures. Sometimes there's a conversation about it, you need to go back, it's not your time, all of that. Well, my people actually do die, but their death came in a way that was unexpected and traumatic, and apparently they need some aftercare. They need something on the order of a healthcare continuum in the afterlife just to calm down and get acclimated before they're really ready for the adventure of what we might think the afterlife would hold. All those possibilities and exciting things to see and do.
How did that look like for you, right? Like, did you just wake up one day or go to sleep one night and have that experience? It sounds like you have a pretty good grasp about what it entails, but did you always have that clarity? I mean, what did it look like for you at the beginning?
Well, the best way for me to answer that is I was taught by one of my aunts, who was a first grade Dominican teacher. She taught me right before First Communion. She said, God loves everybody and hears everybody's prayers, but the prayers of children go straight to God's heart. While you're a child, your childhood is going to be short. Don't waste your short childhood. Pray for everything that you can think of, everything and everyone. And I took that to heart, and I'm quoting it, 59 years later. And it made sense to me because of things I'd heard in the gospel about the last being first, and, Jesus loving the little children and all that. I thought God would pay attention to children, and that made sense. So I didn't waste my short childhood, and I prayed a lot. And then I learned that there was this, there's heaven and hell is the way I was taught. And then there's this in-between purgatory thing where most people are not all of one thing or all of another. Most of us are some sort of mixture in between. And it made sense that there be some sort of place where most people kind of land. And purging has to do with cleansing.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you purged your garage or your sock drawer or something somewhere along the line. It made sense to me that there would be some place where people kind of got things in order somehow. And then when I was a child, we had morning and news. We got newspapers in the morning and the evening, and they both had a page with pictures of people who had just died. And so I would look at the papers, and I would pray for the people that just died, and I'd go to sleep praying for them. I was also told that if yours was the prayer that sprung somebody out of purgatory and into heaven, almost like an international border, if you helped them across the border and it was your prayer that accomplished that, you'd have a friend in heaven for all eternity. And so that just sounded like a cool thing. So I would, and I knew that I learned that purgatory was really only for a Catholic idea, and that most other people didn't believe in it. So I'd read in the obituaries they usually said what church the person's funeral was going to be at, and if they weren't a Catholic, I'd pray for them. I figured the Catholics can take care of themselves, but I'll pray for the ones that aren't Catholic. So, and then you've read my book. I had this idea about the line at the bank. My dad would take me to the bank with a little passbook savings thing for college. And when you went to the bank lobby, they planned on making you wait. They had these zigzaggedy velvet rope things that you had to wait your turn. And I just thought, well, purgatory must be like that. And praying for the people in purgatory would be like helping them cut in the line, you know. And so I fell asleep doing that in my little childhood. And then when I was in my early 40s, I was just minding my business asleep. And I was used to having to take a turn with a pager. Most priests, somewhere in their career, are somewhere near a hospital where you have to take a turn being the guy on call in case a Catholic calls for a priest in the middle of the night. And when that pager would go off, you had to suddenly shake yourself alert, talk to the nurse, get the room number, the patient's name, and then you had to quickly dress and drive yourself to the hospital. Well, I was minding my business this one day. I was on a retreat that I was leading, and about 3 o'clock in the morning, I get this dream of somebody burning to death on the engine of a car. He hadn't been in a wreck, but for whatever reason, he was sitting on a radiator and he burst into flame and he was screaming. And I woke up and I just thought, wow, that was not my dream. That's somebody else's stuff. And so I prayed to him right away and said, I don't know who you are. My name is Nathan. I'll help you. I'll try to figure out what we do.
Mm.
So that was the beginning.
So that dream, did it feel like a dream or was it like different?
The first part of it I didn't mention. I was finishing a round of golf, and I was playing in my dream. I'm finishing a round of golf with another priest friend, and then we went into the bar. We were going to have a drink, but we walked into this 19th hole on this bar, and it was full of a silent auction going on for a charity. Well, that's, I've run a nonprofit most of my life. You're always raising money, and silent auctions is a thing. So far, this is just my dream. And I see a nasty piece of art on the wall, and in my dream, I say to my friend, look at that god awful thing over there. Who in the world would give that to a charity? They ought to be ashamed. It was so horrid. But it was nasty in a way that it invited you to look more closely at it, the way that we do when there's a wreck on the freeway.
Mm-hmm.
You don't really need to do that, but you're going to do it anyway.
Sure.
Anyway, I started moving toward it, and it moved toward me. And inside this picture frame, this little video started to play about this guy on fire. So I woke up from that and just said, whoever you are, in the morning, I'll get with a partner and we'll pray about it and see what we can do to help.
So you get with a partner, but this partner is not, I mean, this partner has gifts, right? Or a gift.
Yeah, I'm used to praying with other people and praying aloud and kind of getting to know their style of how they pray. And I knew that she was spiritually gifted. And so I just said, would you mind helping me just go into prayer and ask what this is and what we could do to help? So we did that, and we were just quiet in prayer for maybe less than 5 minutes. And at one point she said, whoever this man is, he really wants to talk to you. Would it be okay if I allowed him to? And I knew that she had the capacity to do that. And I just said, we've already protected ourselves. We prayed to St. Michael, the Archangel, and Mary, and St. Dominic, and I would never go into that realm without being surrounded by powerful friends. And we'd already done that. And I just said, yeah, sure, go ahead. And then he spoke through her and explained what was the matter. And, like in any counseling situation, and somebody comes into your office, one of the first things you do after you maybe have a little bit of banter to get things started, there comes a point pretty early on where you say, Trey, what can I do to help you? What is it you want? And that's how we started.
Sure. So a lot of these individuals, do they know that they have passed away, or do they are they aware of that?
I get a little clientele that's that, again, they're not people that died peacefully in their sleep. They're people that died traumatic deaths. And I've had about 450 of them over 25 years. Now they're all vetted. I'm never persuading anybody to do anything. They've all been led my direction. with myself and my prayer partners. We just listen to them, and I think of us as the discharge staff in a medical center, the person on your last day in the hospital who makes sure that you understand your medications, your next therapy appointment, your ride home, that kind of thing. We just sort of help them out the door, but they're going somewhere where they've never been and they need a guide, they need a companion, and we help them choose that person and ask for them to come.
How do you know they're vetted?
Early on, I asked, how did you find me? And I was told, I don't know, somebody brought me here. And they never needed persuading. The very first one, his name was Ray, the guy that I was just talking about. That one took 3 sessions, but after that, it only took 1, and it was usually half an hour to 45 minutes. And there was never any arm twisting or anything. They're absolutely ready to go. They just need to kind of talk their way toward it, and then identify somebody that they'd like to have come and escort them. It's really a pretty simple experience once you're in it.
So do you have a dream
Yeah,
for every one of those 400 plus?
I do. I didn't write them all down 25 years ago when this was first starting, but somewhere along the line, I started keeping a journal on the nightstand. So if they come about once a week. And so I keep a journal on the nightstand just so I don't have to stumble around in the middle of the night trying to find something to write with. So I write it down as soon as I receive it. And then I promise them that I'll be praying for them, and I'll arrange to meet with one of my prayer partners. During the pandemic, it's mostly done via Zoom, which works just fine. Before that, it was in person. But it's just a matter of getting with a prayer partner, protecting ourselves in prayer, and then I started asking their guardian angel. And not every you and I are Catholic. That's language that Catholics use. Other people might say spirit guide or something else, but I just say guardian angel. And I asked their guardian for clarity, because the dream still is a dream, and so it has symbolism in it, and some of it might be very straightforward, but there might be other things that I'm not as clear on. For example, the dream might have lots of people in it. So am I helping only one person or more than one? Because sometimes it's more than one. The way a person tells a story doesn't always make their gender clear. So I might ask about that. And once in a while, I feel like I'm outside the US, and I might want to ask about that. Am I in South America, or I'm in the Middle East? And then those are usually the things. Sometimes there's just little things to orient us. We just ask the guardian, would you mind speaking first? For one thing, it's to do a sort of a mic test, because these people have probably never borrowed another person's voice to speak before. So you're asking somebody to do something brand new. And so their guardian comes on and sort of models it and shows that it's not very hard. And then they stay on the line for maybe, I don't know, some of the guardians can be kind of funny. They're people, and you deal with lots of people having a podcast. Some of them are probably really, really deadly serious, and others might be very playful. And the angels are like that because they're persons. And so sometimes they want to play with us a little bit. Other times they're just matter of fact. Once they've accomplished getting the one that they care for oriented to doing this, they slide aside. They'll say, I'm going to slide to the side so that he can or she can use the voice, but I'll be right here praying along with you.
Have they ever given you, the guardians, that is, have they ever given you any other information, like regarding your life, or that would help you out?
I rarely ask that. Once in a while, we pray to a bunch of the saints, and once in a while, one of them will step up to the mic. And they know that we're busy, and they always sort of preface whatever they have to say that way. I know you people have work to do today, but I'd like to have a word, and here's what I'd like to say. Once in a while, there's some sweet little messages, and the saints are just as cool as can be. They're just people that are, the fact that they're famous, and not all the saints are. Sometimes they're really not that well known, but they can be really cool, and they'll give you some support.
Sure.
What Saint Rose of Lima is a Dominican who was a mystic and had all kind of weirdness in her life. And some of the mystics are like that. When you manifest gifts like this, people can roll their eyes and, think you're just nuts. And she pretty much said that. She said, if you know anything about me, my life had plenty of odd manifestations in it. But she just said, stick to what you're doing. Don't let what people think of you bother you too much. Just
Well, were you open to that idea that they can communicate with you? I mean, I know your grandmother had that. She was a mystic, right?
yeah, she was. She was very big on Anthony of Padua, whose feast was just last week. She walked over, and then Saint Joseph, the husband of Mary, the carpenter. She bought Time Life books through the mail and asked Joseph to help her rewire her house at 65. And just assumed that it would work because Joseph would do it. So anyway, I watched that, and I was the grandchild that lived next door that she could tell her wild stories to and know that she'd be respected.
Sure. So I guess that kind of helps you a little bit with this, right? Like a little bit of, no, I don't want to, I want to say unusual, right? For some people, right? This is,
Well, it is. There's no question. Yeah, it did help. I just saw that. I always believed that there was more to reality than the physical world. I'd been taught that from way early on, and it always made sense to me. You can't look at a starry sky and think we're the only sentient beings in the universe. I can't.
absolutely. Like I'm all about this, right? Like, near death experiences, the literature on that is just fascinating to me. And when you go to those, do you go to the conferences?
To Ions, I
Yeah.
do. I'm going to speak at the one in Salt Lake City over the Labor Day weekend.
Well, let me ask you this. Do you go as um, yourself as Nathan Castle, or do you go as
It's like
priest?
Halloween. Do you think I go as Batman or something?
Do you put your priest hat on, or do you go as Nathan Castle?
I go as when they ask you, they print your name tag in advance, and I always put Father Nathan on it because it's distinctive. There's usually not another Catholic priest in the crowd, and uh, I'm wearing my religious habit right now because I just came from Mass just moments ago.
Mhm.
I don't usually wear my habit. I usually wear a big Dominican cross so kind of identify myself as somebody that looks kind of clergy-like. Um,
And
uh,
what are people's responses to that?
a lot of times there's lots and lots of Catholic people or people that at least say I was raised Catholic or I used to be an altar boy or whatever that have Catholic heritage. Sometimes they're called the Catholic alumni. They're not actually practicing the faith any longer, but it's where they came from.
Mhm.
Um, very often they're grateful that that I'm willing to talk out loud about this stuff because there are lots of groupings of people where it's unsafe to speak about any kind of spiritual experiences without it affecting your career. People in the medical profession or in academia, for example, sometimes can be reticent to talk about these kind of experiences. Sometimes in the sciences where there's a particularly materialistic bias, people don't want to be known as that person. So they're grateful a lot of times that I'm willing to talk out loud about it. And, because in the church, there's plenty of people that want to, critique and
Yeah,
debunk and so on.
absolutely. Well, that's my follow up is, do you have to tiptoe around some of the verbiage,
I do.
the semantics?
I do. Words are really important to me. I'm a preacher. I was an art major when I first went off to college. And when I realized that wasn't it, and when I ended up joining not only an order, but I joined the Order of Preachers. So words and preaching as a creative expression is my life. So I don't use the word channeler, for example, to describe what I do, although that's kind of the popular parlance for allowing your voice to be borrowed by somebody else. It's just radioactive in the church, and there's nothing I can do about that. So I don't allow myself to be called that. I think it's a gift of prophetic speech, and so that's the way I describe that gift. And then people will refer to me as a medium, and on the face of it, what's the matter with that? You know, it just means to be in the middle of, you know, median, middle, medium. How would you like your steak? You know, but again, that's a word that has a kind of negative valence inside the church, so I don't use that one either. Without trying to offend anybody who's a medium, I just trying to stay. I'd like to not be a former priest.
Well, yeah. I mean, yeah. What about the book? Were you worried about the book and what the church may perceive it as?
Some, although I try not to allow myself to make decisions based on fear, and I counsel people the same way. Pay attention to your fear, and then look it in the eye, and decide whether you're surrendering your freedom to fear. As fear goes up, freedom goes down. The more you are afraid of a thing, you know, the less free you'll behave toward it.
Well, let me ask you this: if they come back and say that you have to stop this work, would you stop the work?
I'd cross that bridge when I came to it. I do believe that it's a holy work, and I would just not get ahead of myself. I believe I'm telling the truth, and I'm trying to do it with clarity. And if you follow the stories that are used in the Easter season, the stories right after the death of Jesus and the resurrection stories, right away, people were told to go and tell what you've seen and heard. And they sometimes were believed and other times they weren't.
Sure.
It goes all the way back to the origins of this particular world religion. So I just say what I have to say, and so far so good.
What do the individuals that pass on and that you help, the 400 plus, I think it's like 490, I think it is.
I don't have an exact number, but between 400 and 500, I would think.
500, let's just call it an even 500. Do they describe what it's like on the other side?
To a point, I get we're really task oriented when they come on. We're helping them do a thing, and we're not. I'm not inquiring about, you know, all that they can tell me about the afterlife, but I have a rule that I don't disclose anybody's story without asking their permission to do so. And it just seems rude in the middle of it to say, wait a minute, Trey, before you leave, I'm thinking of writing a book. Can I put your story in my book? That just seems rude. And so what we've done is go back to people afterwards at some later date and just go back into prayer and say, are you available? And if so, and they all have been. And I thought it would be a really simple yes or no question, because, or it is a yes or no question. May I use your story? But we got little updates on what happened next, what happened after they made this crossing. And some of that's really been fun, you know, and it goes all different directions because people are so different one from the next.
Wow. And you experience all types of people in these explorations. It's not just heavenly people, right? Like you experience all walks of life.
Well, I've dealt with people that took someone's life, people that died in wars, foreign countries, people that didn't speak English that are talking to me or talking to my partner using my voice, speaking English. Death is very equalizing. Everybody dies. There's not just one kind.
Yeah, absolutely.
And some of them have died out. Most of them have died either within my lifetime or within maybe 30 years before it. So mostly 20th century. Once in a while, I get somebody earlier than that, but not very often. And then one thing I've learned is that time doesn't have much to do with it. They're not being punished. It's just that some people they want to work at their own pace. And if it's meant the passage of a lot of time on the earth, it doesn't really matter.
Has Jesus or any of the other masters out there come through?
Jesus came through explicitly in one of them. You read the first book. Do you remember the story of Dwight?
Well, I do remember Dwight, but I'd figured you would be the best person to tell that.
Exactly. well, we can do it together. Dwight was he showed me in a dream a really weird scene of being, I just saw the naked torso of a guy and I was on top of him and he was screaming, "What are you doing to me?" And I woke up. I thought, wow, I wonder what this one's going to be. I've been a campus minister most of my career, so I've mostly worked with 18 to 30-year-olds, and really mostly people in their early 20s. And this guy named Dwight turned out to be a closeted gay Catholic guy who was 22 years old at the time of his death. He had never told anybody that he was gay. Nobody knew that. But then on top of that, he had an itch for, he didn't use the word sadomasochism, but he said, "Have you ever heard of people that either want to receive or cause pain during sex?" I said, "Well, yes, I have heard of that." And he said, "Well, I don't know why I was gay to begin with, and I don't know why I had this particular itch, but it was very persistent. And I finally decided to do something about it." And he found some advice somewhere that said, "Go to this bar and stand on this end near this door, and somebody will show you down the hall and go into this room." Anyway, he did all those things that he was told to do. He was joined by someone that he had never met, who asked if he would disrobe and would he allow himself to be tied to a bed. And he submitted to that willingly. And then he thought that there would be some little bit of cutting or something. And instead, he said the guy pulled out things that looked like curtain rods sharpened to a point like a pencil. And he got on top of me and shoved them into my lungs. And that's what he wanted to show me, that he didn't put up a fight because he couldn't. His hands were tied. And then he said people started showing up when we said, "What kind of people? The earth people or afterlife people?" And he said, "The afterlife ones." But he said, I had gone into a lot of trouble to be where nobody would know I was there. And suddenly I was exposed. And he said, if they'd known who I was and what I was doing, they'd have run me out of town on a rail. So I ran before they had a chance to chase me.
Mm.
So his experience of leaving the body and moving into the afterlife was flight. And so he created that, and he ran into hiding. And then he went unconscious and woke up in a hospital. And he said, I was visited by people, and he said, like in a hospital where people come in and change a bag, or they look at charts or the machines and stuff. He said there was this one guy that was just really nice, and he was like a hospital chaplain, and he came in and he visited me. And he didn't stay too long because I really wasn't up to long visits. But he always said, "I'll come back again, and I'll visit, I'll stay a little bit longer." And then eventually he said, he asked the guy, his name is Dwight, "Did you ever see a crucifix?" And he said, "Yeah, I was Catholic." And he said, "Well, I was that guy." And then he said, "And you know what? That day there was no loincloth. I was just as naked as could be, because that was part of the deal, is that they weren't only going to kill me, but they were going to shame me. And it was a busy street. My mom was standing right there, and so were her women friends, but that was the deal. And then he said, and they put sharp metal things into my body." And so there was Jesus kind of swapping stories with a guy that had sharp metal things pushed into his body. And he just said, I remember him saying, "You're not going to believe it. I've been visited by somebody, and you're not going to believe it." And I said, "Remember who you're talking to, buddy. Give me a try." And he said, "Well, Jesus, but not the judgy one."
Not the judgy one.
Not the judgy one. And then he went on to describe those visits. And so,
well, if you were to encounter Jesus, right, in these communications, and you had an opportunity to ask him a question, right? I'm sure you have many, but what's one that comes to your mind, like right now, immediately, that you would want to ask him?
well, it's not hypothetical. I've been doing this for 25 years, and I've been doing it out loud in public for 4. And I'm increasingly asked about what people usually call verification. Can you prove that these people actually lived? And, can you come up with death certificates or something that verifies? And I'm interested in the world of consciousness studies in the universities.
Mhm.
And I live on the campus of the University of Arizona, and there's a lot of that study being done right here. And um, if I were to try to be in dialogue with a scientific community that studies phenomenology and near death and all of this, they're going to ask for that. And so I've been saying to the Lord, do you want me to do that or not?
Mm.
I'm not charging on, this is not my own work. I believe I'm the servant of the Lord, and I'm asking, I can continue to do what I'm doing the way I'm doing it and continue to be helpful. But do you want me to do this other thing? And I'm still waiting on the answer.
Mm. That's so interesting.
One answer that I've gotten so far is not yet.
Really?
Yeah.
What do you think they're waiting? What do you think it's timing?
Timeliness is always important. You know, haven't you found that in your life? You know,
I get frustrated at times, right? Like I've learned patience. But
how long did that take?
39 years. I mean, I'm still learning. I mean,
sure. So is everybody.
I look back at my life, and there's always instances of, like, you think you're ready for something, and it's like you're chomping at the bit, and then you find out later that you weren't ever, you weren't ready for it at the time. Divine timing.
Well, and I'm still trying, as I mentioned earlier, trying to, if it can play out that way, I'd like to stay a priest in good standing in the Catholic Church while doing this work. And one question would be, would that be more of an aggravation if I started doing, proving that somebody was who they said they were? And then I would only do that with people who had given me permission to even do that. But if I got their permission and I was able to, I'm not very good at my computing skills. And do you ever watch any of those shows that have some crime solving computer geek that has massive walls full of
Sure.
tech, and all they have to do is type in a few things and they've got the suspect's home address and whatever? That just doesn't work that way. There's all these firewalls and all these, then you have to pay to do the, and then create the account and all that. I just don't have time for that or the patience for it. Someone else would have to do that on my behalf. But that's a long answer to a short question. You asked me, do I have something I would like to ask Jesus? And that's it. Do you want me to do that, boss? Still waiting.
It's just so fascinating, this work.
I believe so. And it's joyful. That's the thing I like about it the most. It fits what the Catholic Church calls the Paschal Mystery, how Good Friday turns into Easter Sunday only 3 days later.
Mm-hmm.
You can throw the whole horror of crucifixion and hatred of the religious leaders and the secular leaders, and then 3 days later it all starts resolving itself.
Absolutely.
And I'm watching these people that died deaths that would just curl your hair, and then they're working through it. They're getting the help they need, and it's just a story to tell after a while.
So do they so you have these sessions with them, right? Like at a certain point, do you lose connection with them?
Well, verbally, I continue to pray for them. I just call them the ones that are there's 26 stories that are in print, and I call those the book people because their stories are in the books. And then sometimes I can call a meeting of them. For example, I can say, hey, would all the book people please step forward if you're not busy? I have a question I'd like to run by you. And then I mention all the other ones that have been through this process with myself and my prayer partners, and I gather them and just say, I'd like your help in any way that you can help. I'm trying to start a podcast right now. I'm trying to launch in September, and I pray to them and say, any of you know anything about this stuff? Can you find me help? Can you get the word out?
What's your biggest struggle with that?
With podcasting?
Yeah. What's your biggest pain point? Maybe I can help.
Well, one question right now is, do I try to go really large right out of the gate, or do I try to start small?
Like in terms of what? Like
I've been coached by Jack Canfield of Chicken Soup for the Soul
for
a number of years, and he and Patty Aubrey, his assistant, are great big thinkers that encourage people who seek out their help to go large. That's what they do. And they've put me in touch with someone in New York media that I've been having some conversations with about, do I go that route and pay for professional services and stuff? And then I'm also getting advice that, no, you have a valid poverty, and Zoom works just fine, and you could get started and kind of cut your teeth without spending a lot of money and see how it goes.
What does your heart tell you?
The second.
And that's the answer. That's been the answer for me. That's the compass, following the heart.
Yeah. Well, we've done a lot of, I have a little team of people that are my posse, and some of them are podcasters, and podcasters are some of the nicest people I've ever met. And there's very little ego involved when I say that I'm trying to start a podcast. Lots of people say, I'd love to help. What do you need?
Sure.
So
I mean, we're like a community. We're like a family, you know.
It seems that way to me. I know that I don't want to do interviews all the time. And I want the podcast to be a forum to tell new stories, because I have so many to tell. There'll be another third book eventually, but I think I'd like to introduce some of the stories on a podcast.
Sure.
And then, but I wanted to have 3 strands, like braided hair, you know, or like a lanyard or something where you have strands. I want one part of it to be a story. I want the second part of it to be what I'm calling compassionate response. When people hear some of these stories, they come to me through my website and tell me about their son or daughter that died of a drug overdose or whatever. And they have questions that come from a wounded heart. And so I want to have a strand that's a compassionate response that is evoked by this story. And then the last one I want is some kind of spiritual practice. You know how a lot of people do yoga?
Yeah.
And I'll say to people, do you know anybody that does yoga? Well, just about everybody does. And I'll say, how many of them want to become a Hindu? Almost nobody. That's not where they're doing yoga. There maybe a few, but most of them just found a spiritual practice from one of the world's great religions that they find wholesome and helpful. And they got somebody to teach them how to do it. Well, I feel like I can be that Catholic priest who, because of the internet, can be available to anybody that wants to ask a question, and then put together some spiritual practices that are from the Catholic Christian tradition that might be helpful even for people that are not that.
Sure. But here's the thing, not too many Catholic priests are doing your work, right? So I think it's important that you take care of this and nurture it. And I think just following your heart, right, will help put it in the hands of people that will do that. And once you make that first step, obviously God, the universe, Jesus, anyone, the saints will help you along that path. I think
I'm confident of that. There's an analog in my life. In 1994, I was sent to Arizona State University as the director of campus ministry, and the place was broke, and the building was leaking, and the bills were all being paid late. And over that 12-year period, we were trying to expand the place. And one night I remember we were talking about breaking out walls and trying to expand the seating, and somebody just said, what if we just tore the whole place down and start it over? And we had a good laugh and went home. And that's what we ended up doing. We raised $6.5 million, and they did tear the place down and build a new one. And I learned so much in that process. If you'd told me when I first went there that I was going to lead a capital campaign, I didn't know the first thing about it. But people know how to do stuff. And if you come to them with an idea and you follow through and you work hard, all kind of stuff can happen. And that's where I feel like this is all headed for me, that it really is an adventure, but it's joyful and exciting.
It's exhilarating, right? Like
exhilarating. It is a lot of the time. There's none of these. Once in a great while, one of these stories will be enough for a day, because, for example, ones that involve Mexican drug cartels. I do one of those and I just like to walk away from it. I'll come back another day. Sometimes the cruelty that is in the stories is enough to kind of take the wind out of you for a little bit. But even then, even those people, they're so well taken care of, and they're nurtured, and I get to watch them cross from place to place, and it's joyful.
Have these stories changed your image of God or of the universe?
One of the things that they brought home to me is how God is embedded in everything that God has ever made, and that God is in you and in me and everybody else. And whether they believe in God or not, or believe in an afterlife or whatnot, that there is goodness to be found all over the place. And the importance of cooperation. Sometimes I say, our national festival is Independence Day on July the 4th. And if I had my way, July 5th would be Interdependence Day, because I just think they're equally important. And in our culture, Independence Day gets a little overblown, or just the idea of being independent can be overblown. And one of the ways that I see all of this working is that God has created a universe where it's constructed so that we rely upon one another. No one person has all the tools in the chest,
Sure, absolutely. I mean, I rely on a lot of people.
It's not that I didn't know that before. It's just been brought home, as a crucial idea that you don't have to know it all or do it all. You just need to be faithful to.
Well, that's the interesting thing about consciousness studies, like the 0 point field, the one field, all of that, right? Consciousness in itself.
Yeah. And for me, there's no question that I'm eccentric. And I know what the word means. It just means out of the center. But if it's an infinite field, where's its midpoint? How do you find the midpoint of an infinite field? And if the infinite field is God's love doesn't get weaker and weaker as you go out from the center, wherever that is. It's overabundant everywhere. So I don't have to be centric. I kind of like my eccentricity. I think it serves the Lord.
Sure. Who's your favorite author that is not non-religious?
Well, there are two. Well, not religious. That would be J.D. Salinger.
Yeah.
I wish that he had I thought that when he died, that would be a whole trove of things that he had, he quit publishing anything like 30 years before he died. And I thought when he died, there would be this like trove of things. And if there is, I don't know of them.
What do you love about his work?
His craft, the way that he could create a character so vividly. Yeah. I remember it's one of my favorite sentences in, I think it's to Esme with Love. He describes this character, this kind of vain woman. She was a woman who, for a ringing phone, dropped exactly nothing. I just love that description.
The detail on that.
Who sits next to a ringing phone and doesn't answer it? And she was a woman who, for a ringing phone, dropped exactly nothing. And like, anyway, I just loved his wordcraft, his way of bringing characters, and especially odd characters, to life. And then, Flannery O'Connor, but a lot of her themes are religious. But have you ever read any Flannery O'Connor?
No, I have not.
She was a Southern writer, and she was a Southern Catholic, and so, but she has all these really odd, bizarre characters, some of whom are villainous, but the story is told from their point of view, so that you sort of like them because you know the way they think. You might not like the way they act, but you kind of feel for them because you've been brought into their inner world.
Yeah.
Flannery O'Connor, you might enjoy her. And then C.S. Lewis, he writes on religious things, but The Screwtape Letters is my all-time favorite book.
Amazing. I've been meaning to ask you, it's been popping in the back of my head ever since we started. Like, when you get into those prayer groups, do you need the prayer groups to touch base with those entities that have passed, or can you do that individually now?
I've never done it individually, and I wouldn't do that. I just think it's something that is collaborative. Yeah. So both of my sisters also have the gift of being able to facilitate the speech. So if I'm with either one of them, we have to decide or we even tell the person that we're dealing with, you can use either one of us, or sometimes we'll state a preference. If it's just the same, all the same to you, please go over that side of the room. And, but no, I would not do this alone. I would always use a partner.
Sure.
At least one, sometimes more than one, sometimes like a married couple. And then I have one team that I use real regularly, that one is in Southern California, the other one's in Buffalo. One's a counselor and the other one's a retired dentist. Neither of them's Catholic, but they're just good at what they do. They're really good companions.
What do you think? You think a lot of us have this gift of being able to do that?
Oh, a lot of us have all kind of gifts. The speaking through, maybe not, but one thing that people sometimes want from me, especially when they're in deep grief, is they really wish that I would let their son talk to them or something. And I just say, what you're asking for is mediumship, and I don't do that. If that's really what you're seeking, keep looking, and it won't be hard to find that's readily available. But I just don't do that. What I'd rather have them, what I teach them, for example, do you know the word chaplain?
No.
It's the last prayer of the day in a monastery. It's like bedtime prayer for monks. And it's essentially handing your consciousness over to the Holy Spirit as though it were an object. If you could imagine your consciousness being a ball that you could hand into the safekeeping of the Holy Spirit and say, I'm going to be going unconscious. I'm not going to be needing this exactly. So if you'd like to hold on to it during the night, and if you could use it in any way, if you can do anything in my unconscious or subconscious, you created it, it's yours, have at it. So I can teach people how to be more receptive to spiritual, to be more receptive, and see if that they find that comforting or helpful.
Well, would that help towards your verification if you had, like, say, if you had people that they came up in your, wherever and said, can you contact this loved one, and then you get with your prayer group and then like pray for that person, and you make contact with that person and they give you information? Wouldn't that be one side of the verification process?
It's possible, and I thought I might go back to some of the ones in there's 26 in these two books, and some of them are kind of standouts to me as people that are, if I do retreat sometimes with a heart-shaped bullseye, and I get people to kind of map their heart. Is there anybody in the middle of it? Is there anybody that is in the center of your heart, or has anybody ever been there? And or can you give me a little functional map of your heart? And there are some of the people that I've helped who have stayed on my heart. One of them is Shelby, the old Southern lawyer who you read about in book one. And he told me in the permission giving story that that he said, I was a Christian all my life, but it was only late in life that I was asked to be on a church board, like a parish council. And he said, when I did that, I learned how mean church people could be. And he said, I want to spare you any harm that might come to you from church people, because I know that what you're doing is holy. And he was a lawyer. He said, I'm going to be your afterlife counsel. And I will do whatever I can to, if anything that I can do to spare you church trouble, I will do it. And so I've thought I might just go back to Shelby and say, hey, Shelby, what do you think? Could you give me your address? Could you, that's where I think I would start, kind of like in your circle of friends.
Sure. Absolutely. Father Castle, thank you so much for taking the time to be here. I enjoyed every second of it. Your book, Afterlife Interrupted, how can people buy it? I think you have a website as well.
Yeah, the books are, and I also have another book on the Wizard of Oz called In Toto 2, The Wizard of Oz is a Spiritual Adventure. That's another passion of mine. They're all available on Amazon. My name is Nathan Castle. Just go to Amazon. You'll find them in 3 formats: print books, ebooks, and audiobooks. And the audiobooks I've voiced my own audio, and in the Afterlife Interrupted books, most of the time, the actual prayer partner voices their own part. And so I really like those because they just have a, I don't know, a texture and a richness listening to it. And one of my partners has since died. And so just listening to her voice again gives me joy because I love her and I can hear her voice. But anyway, they're all available on Amazon. My website is Nathan, Nathan dash Castle, CASTLE.com, Nathan-Castle.com. If people want to contact me, don't use Facebook Messenger. And putting a comment next to something on my YouTube channel, I'm not as slow. I'm slower to respond to that than I am to an email coming through my website. There's, when you go on the website in the upper left, there's a little envelope icon. Click on it, send me an email, and I'll do the best I can to be back in touch.
So you just triggered a thought for me.
What's that?
Your friend that just passed away. Is there any way you can connect with that friend?
Possibly. I wouldn't mind doing that because I don't believe that's dabbling in, or disturbing the dead or whatever, if I have a good holy reason for doing the thing, yeah, that's a good idea. Maybe I'll toss that one around and pray and see if I get an answer to that. She was hugely helpful and encouraging, and she had already had survived colon cancer before I even met her. We only were friends for the last 2 years of her life, but fast friends. And she had a bunch of spiritual gifts too, so she was every bit as odd as I was. But hers were manifest in different ways. But that's a good idea.
Have you ever read Gary Schwartz's work?
Well, Gary works on this campus
I know.
at University of Arizona, and we've met. I don't think I've ever read anything that he wrote.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Fascinating work. There's also a lady, Suzanne Giesman, who does this work.
I've had lunch with Suzanne. She's
a great lady.
Yeah, she is. And she's a great teacher. Very compassionate. I've gotten to know her a little bit. We travel in the same circles. And so she would take my phone call, but I'll probably see her at Ions. I'll be there in Salt Lake City. This is the first time we'll have met in person since the pandemic.
Wow.
So I'm looking forward to that. And it's the first time I'm going to be given a full speaking opportunity. I was on panels where I got 13 minutes. This time I have a full hour. It'll be the first time I've
Are you
had
nervous?
that.
Are you nervous?
Oh, not at all. Just it's just a matter of disciplining myself to construct something like I do when I do a homily. You can't say everything. You have to say some things, and you have to sit down and shut up. You know that old thing about say what you're going to say it, say what you said. I need to structure myself and not just wing it. But my preference is to wing it.
That's my problem. Sometimes I wing it too much. I'll start out structured, and then I'll end up just winging it at the end.
Well, I'm okay with, I just know I'm 66 years old. I don't have to reinvent myself in order to make a good presentation. I'm
sure you do great.
But usually it's just picking a few stories and going into them in some detail. And there's so many that are so delightful. And I have a few stories that I can tell without breaking my rule about, disclosing things. I know how to tell a story without, divulging too much. But anyway, It'll be fun. Whatever it is I do, I'll enjoy it.
Father Castle, thank you so much for joining. This has been amazing.
Well, if you ever have a repeat guest, keep me in your, you probably don't have a Rolodex. Do you even know what that is?
Yeah.
The contacts list.
Absolutely.
If I can serve your audience again, I'd be happy to.